Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Raggio. I'm a senior fellow at Foundation for Defense of Democracies and editor of FDD's Long War Journal. This is Generation Jihad, the podcast that covers all things in what used to be known as the global war on terror, but we now call the Long War. My co-host today is Joe Trusman. Joe is my friend and colleague at FDD. He's also an editor at FDD's Long War Journal. He's a senior research analyst who focuses primarily on Palestinian terror groups, Hezbollah, and Joe knows just about everything going on with Israel and Iran's war and its proxies. He's a wealth of knowledge. You should follow Joe on Twitter to figure out what's happening on in the region. I do. It's at Joe Trusman. Joe, welcome. Happy Monday. Welcome back to the Long War Journal. I'm sorry. Welcome back to Generation Jihad.
Hey, Bill, I appreciate the very nice compliments about me, so about the work that I do. So I greatly appreciate that. Thank you. So, but yeah, I'm very happy to be here.
No, Joe, always a pleasure to catch up with you Monday and figure out what's happening. Well, look, let's just jump right into it. You had a great update at the Long War Journal. I recommend people go check it. I love visuals and maps, and Joe and the team at FDD, he worked with to put this together. So go to Long War Journal. It's called Interactive Visual Profiles of 28 Iran-backed terror groups and branches in the West Bank. Joe, tell us about this project you put together. Tell us about the importance of these groups and what this means to security in the West Bank.
Right. So, we've been talking about the West Bank for quite some time here at on Generation Jihad, and of course in articles on Long War Journal. So, nevertheless, what I did here with this visual is that I came up with the essentially I took all the groups that are operating in the West Bank. All right. Now it's not just a couple groups. Okay. As Bill, as you mentioned, we're talking about 28 groups here. And so what do we mean 28 groups exactly? Right. So there's three major organizations that are I guess you could say they're the most active in the West Bank. Okay. It's Islamic Jihad. It's Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, and there's Hamas. Now, these three major organizations, they have branches, okay? So smaller groups that represent them or are affiliated with them that essentially operate across the West Bank, especially the northern West Bank. So let's say Islamic Jihad, for example. They have 10 affiliates, all right, in different areas of the northern West Bank. For example, in like Jenin and Nablus and Tubas and in other areas. Same thing with Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades. And Hamas doesn't have nearly as many, but they have a few of these, what they call battalions, right? They're not actually a battalion. They don't have that many members in the West Bank, but nevertheless, they call them battalions, and they're operating in these areas in the West Bank. So what I did in this visual is highlight that these organizations are active in the West Bank and where they're located, right? So that's super important. And also, we noted that the evidence that we use to determine that they're active, that these guys are actually legit. Because, in the world of terrorism and terrorist groups, there's a lot of times you come across people saying, oh, hey, we did this, we did that, we're a group. But they're not really. They're essentially they're just making stuff up, right? Or they exaggerate. So, but in this visual, I think we followed a criteria that allowed us to establish that these guys are legitimate, right? These are legitimate groups that are active in the West Bank. So we highlighted that in this piece, and I think it's super important because it shows how bad the West Bank has gotten over the last 3 years. Actually, more than 3 years now. And again, I've said it before, speaking with you, Bill, Israelis are going to have to pivot to the West Bank eventually. I mean, over the last couple of weeks, we've seen the West Bank, the Israelis launch a military operation there. It wasn't, it wasn't anything like Gaza, of course, but, they needed to go in there to basically root out this terrorist infrastructure that is operating there. In different areas, especially the northern West Bank. But I've said this many times. It's I don't think there's like a military option in the West Bank isn't going to solve the issue. That's it. You know, it's
Yeah,
not.
that's.
It's not.
I think if Israel has problems in Gaza, the West Bank is going to make Gaza look like a picnic if they have to go in militarily. That's my biggest concern. One of the things that I found really interesting about this, Joe, is the we mentioned it. The geographical distribution of these groups, primarily in northern part of West Bank. Now, does that mean these groups are not active in the South, or is it that they're just not as concentrated? Is there a reason for this, for what I'm seeing here in this visual?
Yeah, it's actually a very good point. I mean, there is a little activity in the South. It's scattered, right? There is activity like near Jerusalem, right? But it's nothing like the North. Now, why is that? I think the reason for that is because of the Palestinian Authority, right? If you go further south, closer to Jerusalem, near Ramallah, that's where the PA is the strongest, okay? So in the north, not nearly as much, right? So these organizations, these groups have taken advantage of that by building these bases, right? Or these hubs of terrorism, I guess you can call it, in these areas, in these cities, in these villages. And the PA, and this is something I've really wanted to look into. I think it's very important. Why is the Palestinian Authority not doing anything? Because, listen, I can tell you for a fact the Palestinian Authority understands what's happening. It understands that Iran is undermining the PA's authority in the West Bank. They know it for sure, okay? But they're not doing much about it. So why would they not do anything about it, right? Or much, right? You see the PA security forces arresting some Islamic Jihad members, maybe, detonating some IEDs that are planted underneath the road in Jenin, right? But they're not doing much. Now, from folks that I've spoken to that have firsthand knowledge of this area, some have told me that the PA doesn't have the force to do it, right? They don't have the manpower, rather, to do it, to really go after these groups. Okay, maybe. But I also think, the PA doesn't want to be seen by as doing the work for the Israelis, right? But at the same time, PA needs to do this because these guys, especially Islamic Jihad, especially Hamas, again, is undermining the PA here. So they need to do something. And, in a perfect world, the Palestinian Authority and the Israelis would get together, all right, and come up with a strategy, right? Because this is a problem that interests both parties here to basically resolve. But of course, there's politics, right? They don't trust each other, right? So it's not that simple. But the nice thing, I guess, you can say out of all of this is that there's still security coordination going on between both parties, between the PA and the Israelis, right? I mean, listen, after October 7th, I mean, have you heard Mahmoud Abbas say, "I'm stopping security coordination with the Israelis"? He hasn't said that, right? He hasn't stopped. So that's a good thing, right? But I mean, there's still a lot more that needs to be done. And I'm afraid here, essentially, that we're going to get to, or the Israelis, the Palestinians in the West Bank are get to a point where they can't do anything anymore about these organizations. They've grown too large, okay? All right, that's the problem. Because despite these raids, these near daily counterterrorism raids by the Israelis and some action by the PA, it's not enough. It's not. All right.
No,
and you could see it in the visual. I mean, 3.5 years of this, of counterterrorism operations by the Israelis. Look, these organizations are still growing. They're still getting weapons, right? From Iran, from criminal organizations in Israel. Weapons are still flowing into the West Bank. And eventually, there's going to be advanced weapons. When I say advanced weapons, I'm talking about RPGs. We're already seeing claymores in the West Bank, right? Imagine RPGs. What's next? Katyushas, right? That's a serious possibility. Now we're seeing car bombs, right? In the last 6 months, in the last about 8 months now, especially at the beginning of the year, started this uptick in car bombs in the West Bank. That's serious, right? What stops I think the biggest fear here is, and this is from talking to Israeli officials, I think the biggest fear, one of the fears here is that a group, whatever, Islamic Jihad, puts together, builds a car bomb, right, and just drives it into a settlement, right, into an Israeli community in the West Bank and blows it up. They've already tried, by the way. They've already tried to do that actually a couple of weeks ago. But let's say this time they're successful, right? It's I'm afraid it's going to happen. So things are getting worse. Absolutely.
We talked about this, Joe. That's the real problem. What you just mentioned at the end there, there's no Israelis living in Gaza. So that's a situation where at least you don't get no, look, we had obviously October 7th, but you don't have that intermixing of populations where what you just described can be light a fuse that I don't think anyone can predict what the outcome is. What I found interesting about this visual, the two largest groups operating, with their subgroups, Islamic Jihad and the Al-Aqsa Martyrs brigades. Now, Islamic Jihad, we get it. Now, their expanding presence in the West Bank is concerning. Hamas's expansion in the West Bank should be concerning. But Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades is technically part of Fatah. Is that correct? Which runs the Palestinian Authority. Is that correct?
I would say there's loose connections, okay? Before, or in the early 2000s, right, during the Second Intifada, definitely, absolutely, they were connected. But now there's some link there, but not nearly as much. So for me, it's hard to say that this is like Mahmoud Abbas or the Fatah party sending terrorists, against the Israelis. I wouldn't be comfortable saying that. So, but there's some loose links.
So this is Fatah basically losing control of a legacy terrorist organization.
Something like that. Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good way to put it. But again, things are getting bad, and thankfully there's other signs that thankfully I haven't seen that would worry me even more. Let's say like the PA's security services starting to go rogue, right? Starting attacking Israelis, right? That would really worry me. We've seen some examples of that, don't get me wrong, but it's few and far in between, okay? So there's not some organized campaign here by the PA's security services to shoot or create or carry out acts of terrorism, either against Israeli civilians or shooting IDF soldiers. Thankfully, we're not seeing that, because when we start seeing that, that's when you know that the PA's just lost control completely, right? So, but that's another worry here, that eventually that will happen, right? It's the West Bank is so unstable right now. Who knows what will happen? So, again, we're just highlighting this with the 28 groups that listen, things are getting bad here. Here's the evidence, right? You need to pay attention. Things are getting bad.
Yeah, again, I highly recommend give that a look. It's at Long War Journal. Interactive visual profiles of 28 Iran-backed terrorist groups and branches in the West Bank. Great work by Joe and the team at FDD. Joe, early last week, there was the Israeli Special Operations Forces launched a raid into Syria, into a weapons facility. So this wasn't an airstrike, a drone strike, a missile strike. This was an actual ground operation. Now, still don't have details. One outlet was reporting that up 2 to 4 IRGC, or Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is basically Iran's external operations special forces, were captured during this raid. Do we have any more details about what happened? Anything more than Behnam and I talked about this on Friday? What do you know about this raid, and what are you hearing?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I'll be quite honest with you. When I first saw it, I first saw the report of it. It came from a Syrian opposition, website. So I was like, it's Syrian opposition. They would publish something like this,
absolutely.
right?
Behnam talked about this on Friday. How these are sources you have to be wary of, because they often have an axe to grind. I'm familiar with this with opposition groups in many a country that, we get some bad information put out there. It's happening now with Afghanistan and Al Qaeda. So, yeah, go for it, Joe.
Right, exactly. I mean, yeah, it sounds great, but you got to be careful. I mean, listen, when you see this over and over again over the years, you get used to it. You see that you pick up on things when, let's say, something happens in an opposition website, publishes something. You learn eventually that it doesn't mean that it's true. So anyway, that's what I thought here. I'm like, oh, that's really that's serious. Like a ground operation, like sending in a special forces team into
IRGC officers captured.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So it was, and then they blew up this facility, an underground facility. But I thought it was more, fiction. But it sounds like it was true. At least some of it, right? I can't tell you if they captured IRGC guys, right? I can't say, but I think there's a few interesting things about it. First of all, that they had to send a ground force in, right? They had to send special forces in because they couldn't destroy the facility with an airstrike. But now you think about it, well, was the main goal, was it to destroy the facility, or maybe was it to capture documents that were there, right? Or like you were saying, IRGC guys, right? Or somebody, a high value target or a person, right? That may have been the primary goal, right? Not to destroy. And then the secondary goal was to destroy the facility. Nevertheless, but it also, it does sort of, I think about it, it does sort of worry me a little bit that, that if the Iranians or Syrians are building this type of facility, underground facility that the Israelis can't, definitively say that they can hit with an airstrike and destroy, which forces them to send in ground troops, then what are the Iranians and Hezbollah, for example, because Hezbollah is linked to this facility, what are they doing, right? What are they building underground, right? Can Israel get to them, right, with airstrikes? It worries me because they're going to have to send it. I would assume, right, that there's more structures like this in Lebanon and obviously in Iran and maybe even in Syria, that the only real way to get to it and definitively say for sure that you can destroy it is with sending in special forces, right? So that's what worries me about this, right? Because obviously you have the issue with Iran and the nukes, and then obviously with Hezbollah and what's happening with their facilities there, and all the the precision guided missiles that they have, and so on and so forth. And I'll tell you too, which is interesting because I've been talking to folks about this over the last few days. That these underground tunnel systems, right, that they have, or underground sites, a lot of this, they get these, like Iran and Hezbollah, even in Gaza, they've gotten help from the North Koreans.
The Houthis as well.
Houthis, yeah.
Yeah. North Koreans are masters. Joe, I suspect this was first and foremost an intelligence gathering operation. How these tunnels are built, what information can be gained, what was being done there. Can they take captives? Obviously, document and computer exploitation. I think you hit on it. And because the Israelis, one of the things that was in one of the reports that I read, I believe it was at Axios, that they were tracking this location for 5 years.
Yeah.
So, what all of a sudden made them go, we need to go to the site. Now, it could have been activity they may have been detected coming from there, but I think at some point the Israelis needed to get boots on the ground to see how these things worked, how they built, what it would take to take them out via airstrikes, things of that nature. So very, very interesting stuff. So speaking of the Houthis, there was a report over the weekend. You and I talked about this at length.
Yes.
On the side that of the Houthis have sent up to 200 fighters to Syria to support the so-called axis of resistance there to fight against Israel.
Right.
You've done some digging on this. I know you're going to write about this for Long War Journal. Yes. What have you come up with? We could spoil it and talk about it here before you publish.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, it's always an interesting topic. So, yeah, this is, part of the work I think that we do at important work that we do at FDD or Long War Journal as well is that not only we try to publish stories and talk about the Long War and other related topics, but in this case, it got a lot of attention. All right, in the media and in other circles. Okay, this report. And I was asked about it rather. And so, I thought it was interesting. It didn't really make sense to me, but it got a lot of attention. So, I looked into it. So these, like you said, Houthis were sending fighters essentially to to southern Syria, right near the Golan, to fight Israel. It didn't really make sense to me. Like, I mean, okay. The thing is, and we talked about it, Bill, is that I think the story got legs because I think it was like a month or two ago, a Houthi commander was killed in Iraq, right? I think it was. And he was some type of drone expert. So I think that played into the story that gave it, some credibility, right? That it's possible, right? But, so I dug into it. And you helped me here too, of course, Bill. We talked to folks, couldn't get a real answer, right? It's possible. Essentially, what we found out is that it was possible, but nothing concrete. There's no open source evidence to suggest that it happened, that it was going to happen. Also, I did some digging as far as the story is concerned. So where did it come from, right? And then found out it was published in this Russian state-controlled media. It was published in Russian state-controlled media. It was from RIA, RIA, and so that told me, it's this is the type of story that would make for like a propaganda, right? Especially from Russian-controlled media. And coupled with not finding enough evidence and speaking to folks, I don't think this story is true. All right. That's where I'm leaning. Now, it's possible that there's, intelligence that nobody knows about that says that this is true. But, even the original story didn't even cite their source, right? Or sources. Right. And everything it doesn't add up, essentially, right? It doesn't add up. So I don't think it's true. It's interesting, but I'm leaning towards it just being like a fabricated story.
We got to go the range. Is it impossible, improbable, possible, likely, indefinitely? Right? We sit on the possible, but not likely. Right? That's probably the spectrum where you and I come down. Now, listen, I wouldn't be surprised if this is true.
Right.
It's certainly possible. But again, I think the Houthis have a lot on their plate and sending manpower to Syria. Now, they may want to do something like this for propaganda purposes,
sure,
right? To show that they have real skin in the game. Not that they don't. They're taking hits from the U.S. military on a daily basis with weapon system being targeted. But the real strength of the Houthis, if I'm advising the Houthis, please don't. If you're Houthis, don't listen to me. Continue what you're doing in the Red Sea because it's working. The U.S. Navy can't do. They've admitted that they can't defeat you. We don't have the will to do so. That's where I'd be focusing my resources. Continue to use those troops to maintain your strongholds, and you're punching way above your weight just by what you're doing. Launching occasional missile or drone strike at Israel. That's working really well. I'm not sure that, there's a lot of bang for your buck to send 200 fighters. But again, I wouldn't be shocked. And, one thing I wanted to just point out quickly, it's funny when going into these and talking to people, talking to sources, and you have to, there's kind of a dance. And I was explaining this to you over the weekend, Joe. Just the way that people respond to the inquiry. I could get the feel for, because often I'm not going to get a yes or a no. I might get a link to something, or so you got to learn how to read people and how they're answering your questions. So it's just kind of this one just gives me I don't think so. vibe. But we could be wrong about this. Caleb and I have a similar situation with, is the head of the Islamic State this guy in Somalia? The U.S. government claims so. The UN was skeptical about it. We don't think, is it possible? Sure. Is it likely? No. Would we be shocked? I mean, I wouldn't say I wouldn't be, I would be a little surprised, but not like blown out of the water, because it's certainly possible. Anyway, that's how things work in this business. It's on our end, right? I'm sure we have a lot of professionals listening who probably wonder how we deal with, on their, on our side of this. Then there's their side of it. So it's kind of a give and take, and you just gotta learn how to navigate it.
Absolutely,
and come up with the answer. So, Joe, well, next item. Is Hamas playing weekend at Bernie's with its leadership? Numerous Hamas leaders have been killed, and Hamas doesn't seem to want to admit it. What's going on here?
Yeah. It's interesting. Obviously, we've heard the Israelis and the United States actually say, these high key leaders, right, have been killed in Gaza. Whether it's Dave, Isa, Rafa Salame, and others, of course. But Hamas, especially with guys like Dave, especially with Dave, they've been like nothing's happened. Oh, he's okay. He's in good health. Blah blah blah. But something's completely off, right? I don't think, given the history, Israel's attempts to kill him, especially Dave, I don't think they would just come out with this, right? Unless they would
be a major black eye for the Israelis. Yeah. If it winds up he's alive, they're certainly saying he's dead. They have to have concrete proof of this. It can't be just one thing, right? It can't be a communication, or it can't, they've got to have DNA evidence, communication, some type of visual evidence, some combination of that in order to confirm he's dead. Sorry.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. And conversely, but then you have Yahya Sinwar, who's alive, but lately, the last couple of weeks, Hamas has been at least trying to project like everything is normal and that he's doing his duties, right? He's penning letters to the president of Algeria, to Hassan Nasrallah, to the leader of the Houthis, and just saying, that thanking them for their support of the Palestinian people and the resistance. And so you're seeing Hamas doing, again, projecting this, like, Sinwar is doing his job, right? And everything's okay. And of course, on the side saying that, like guys like Dave, he's fine. He's, nothing's wrong with him. He's not, buried somewhere. But nevertheless, but we've seen this before, right? Bill, I'm sure we've seen these guys play these either, these armed groups or jihadist groups play weekend at Bernie's, but I'd love to hear an example from you. I'm sure there's some.
My favorite of all time, Mula Muhammad Omar, the founder of the Taliban.
Yeah.
He died of natural causes in 2013, and the Taliban pretended that they were issuing statements in his name, pretending that he was alive, and this caused a big rift. This is something I think all these jihadist groups probably learned after this, because they're watching what happens with each other. And there is danger in doing what the Taliban, it almost led to the dissolution of the Taliban. Had not Siraj Haqqani and his father Jalaluddin if they hadn't stepped in, as well as apparently the Pakistani military and intelligence services, to sort of rally the Taliban to get everyone back on the case. I mean, Mula Omar's son, who is now the Taliban's one of their two deputy emirs and prime minister, he and his faction had walked, and but the Haqqanis put the band back together, and within less than 6 years, they took control of Afghanistan. So these could be fatal mistakes for terrorist groups, or it can be opportunities for them to learn. But yeah, I don't, Hamas, that's a dangerous game. If they start pretending someone's alive who's dead, there's also religious implications, and people get upset with this. And another thing with the Taliban too, that caused groups like the Islamic movement in Uzbekistan, which work closely with the Taliban, joined the Islamic State, or a large portion of it fractured. Taliban leaders and members who were unhappy joined the Islamic State. So members of Al Qaeda, they were unhappy with this. So there's definitely repercussions for lying about your leader. It's just not worth it. But don't. Hey, if you're Hamas, don't listen to me. I'm wrong about this. You do you, and play Weekend at Bernie's with your leaders, because I think that's the best course for it.
I think they're definitely taking risks right now. They're definitely, lying about things or covering things up, knowing that, listen, right now Hamas is trying to survive, right? And they'll do anything, right? They'll fire from humanitarian zones. They'll operate from humanitarian zones. They don't care, right? And so, yeah, so if they're gonna lie, they're gonna lie about Dave and others. Yeah, and then when the war is over, right, they'll say, "Well, we did this because this, and that, and we didn't, they didn't want to give propaganda points to the enemy or whatever, right?" So I don't know. I think it could blow up in their face. Will it end them? Probably not. I would be surprised. No, probably not. But still, but yeah, that goes back to the thing where, as of now, Hamas is still they're not saying anything about dead fighters in Gaza, right? There could be more than 10,000 dead fighters. There's probably more than 10,000 dead fighters there.
They probably don't have enough people to compile it and put the list out. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that they're out, overtly defeated. They're on the ropes. They're taking a beating without a doubt. And it's if half or more of the cadre has been killed.
Right.
At some point, maybe you don't want to advertise that, but key leaders, I mean, those are the people, that people look up to, and some people can get really upset.
Yeah.
And, if you're not, it's treating them with disrespect.
Right.
But yeah, I encourage Hamas to keep doing that. Go for it. So any, please do. Last item, Joe.
Yeah.
The ceasefire negotiations between Hamas and Israel. The Biden administration, for I would say the last 8 months, have been telling us that deal is so close. It's right around the corner, almost there. I did a little searching on the Google thing before, and yeah, you can just see it. See these headlines just keep coming up every couple of months. How close are negotiations, and should the Biden administration just stop telling us that these I mean, we're 3 weeks away from the 1 year anniversary. I think it's a little disingenuous to say that those negotiations are all, nearly completed. But you tell me.
Yeah, I know. It's so tough. There's, sometimes I've told people when it comes to the ceasefire news about the ceasefire negotiations, a lot of times I've told people I don't believe most of what's coming out, really, because it's been everywhere, right? And as you said, as you've mentioned, with the Biden administration saying on multiple occasions, "Oh, we're so close, almost there." And I think there was this thing a few weeks ago, or maybe last week, where they were putting something together. The administration was putting something together that would say that, "Oh, this is the last one," right? To really get something done.
One more thing we got to get done. We're almost there.
It doesn't work like that. They don't. That's not the language of the Middle East. It doesn't. You're not. It's just so silly. So it just. I don't know. It just seems to me really that at least this administration doesn't understand the Middle East, doesn't understand the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, okay? Doesn't understand Hamas. I don't think they understand Israel either, to be quite honest with you, at times.
Yeah.
They're putting the pressure on the wrong actor here, right? Especially when it comes to Israel.
let me reinforce that point, Joe. This came up in my source. It's sitting on my screen right now. This is a headline, and it's nearly identical. Biden says Netanyahu isn't doing enough to get a hostage deal, and it's just headline after headline with that theme.
Right.
That's what one of the searches turned up to. I mean, really?
Yeah.
If Hamas is holding hostages, what does I just don't understand what this administration expects.
Yeah.
I just couldn't imagine if Israel after 9/11 turned to the United States and says, maybe you shouldn't invade Afghanistan. Maybe you don't need to kill Bin Laden and Zawahiri.
They're resistance fighters.
Remember that. You could cut a deal with these guys. Let's just come. You need a ceasefire. Let's just. Again, and as you said, does this administration understand Israel? Does it even understand what happened on October 7th?
Right.
I don't think so.
I just think that even though I think President Biden does think Hamas is a terrorist organization, I just don't think enough people see Hamas as an actual terrorist organization, really. They're dealing with terrorist groups here. Israel's dealing with terrorist groups, and just don't get that for whatever reason, right? And so we're seeing this, and this administration, I think, just failed, at least when it comes to the ceasefire negotiations, right? I think there's a lot of problems. It's just not with I really want to be clear here. It's not because it's not the U.S.'s fault here that the ceasefire negotiations aren't really getting anywhere. There's a lot of bad actors. I really hate that Qatar is involved. You will know more than I do, Bill, the Qataris, what they've been doing, especially funding jihadist groups there, and obviously Hamas. They are really Hamas's representatives. They are, and I don't understand why they're even. I do see why they're involved, but they shouldn't be involved in this. They're Hamas's guys. That's what they are, and of course they're going to look out for Hamas, right? It's just bad news.
Beware of Qataris bearing negotiations and peace talks. If we hadn't learned anything with Afghanistan, who brokered that deal? Who gave who allowed the Taliban to establish their so-called political office in Qatar, in Doha? It was the Qataris, and they play a double game. And you're absolutely right about the Qataris. I don't and look, this isn't a Republican or Democrat issue. The Trump administration was just as bad with the Qataris as the Biden administration was the Obama administration. They all trusted them. Just trust the Qataris at your own risk. I wouldn't bet the house on it. We should not allow the Qataris to negotiate anything. They're just not good actors.
Right. And I think it's also, it's important to say that I think Israel also was very likely made mistakes through this ceasefire negotiations. I know there's a lot of heat on Netanyahu. There's a lot of people that don't like him for whatever reasons. There's definitely could be some issues there, but my focus is more on obviously this Biden administration, obviously, but more than anything, and of course the Qataris, but more than anything, Hamas is the one, and honestly, it's supporting actors here in Gaza, whether it's the Islamic Jihad or the Popular Resistance Committees or others who were involved in October 7th or who have hostages in their custody. So there's a lot of moving parts here, right? There's a lot of actors involved here, and there's Hezbollah and the Iranians are involved too, for sure, no doubt about it. So, yeah, and right now, at this moment, the way I feel today, at 1:41 Eastern time in the afternoon, is that Sinwar isn't compelled right now to sign a ceasefire or to okay a ceasefire that isn't on Hamas's terms, that doesn't keep Hamas alive in the Gaza Strip and operating. They want to. They're just it's just their survival here, right? That's what Hamas wants, and that's what they're aiming for. And we've seen these reports that. Especially there was one of the hostage negotiators said, I think it was last week, on the Israeli side, that Israel would be willing to let Sinwar, leave, the Gaza Strip, right? If you were to release the hostages, sort of like Arafat did in Lebanon, right? So way back many decades ago. But Sinwar knows the Israelis will still hunt him down, so it's kind of pointless. But anyway. So I, right now I don't feel good about ceasefire negotiations. I can't believe it's almost a year, right? As you mentioned earlier, but this is where we're at. Will the Israelis be able to defeat Hamas? Right? I still don't know. I don't know. It's something like this would take. I think we said it at the beginning of the war when we started doing our regular podcast, Bill, that I think at the beginning of the war, we were saying that it would take years to defeat Hamas, really, in the Gaza Strip. So, and we're not even at a year yet, right? But it's very difficult. I don't know what's going to happen here, to be quite honest with you. And I'm not hopeful a ceasefire will come through anytime soon. But hey, you never know, right? Maybe the Israelis reach Sinwar, right? Things change. Maybe they are hoping that. Maybe there is some hopes, right? Whether in the Biden administration or within the Israeli government, that the Israelis reach Sinwar one way or another, and that will change Hamas's tactics, right? As far as the ceasefire or their calculus. I don't know that it will, but we'll see. So, but as of now, I don't see much movement on the ceasefire for a ceasefire.
Yeah, I'll say this: if the Israelis want to defeat Hamas, a ceasefire is the worst thing that they can do. If they want to see some hostages released, that probably might get some of them. Although I don't believe that Hamas will release them all. But yeah, it's a big mistake for the Israelis to bank on a ceasefire to lead to the defeat of Hamas, because they'll just be back at square one. Joe, thank you so much for joining us today. Always a pleasure to speak with you, and look forward to catching up next week.
I appreciate it, Bill, as always, and hopefully we'll have better or more happier news next time we talk. We never know. You never know, but yeah, always a pleasure.
Would be nice to see Sinwar's head on a platter. Joe, have a great day, and thanks everyone for listening. Thanks everyone for listening to today's episode of Generation Jihad. Just a reminder, you can listen to us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. Please subscribe to Generation Jihad and leave us a review, preferably a positive one, but only if we earned it. Thanks again, and we'll see you all again real soon.